How can we create a sense of belonging for every learner? How can we make the physical spaces of our schools more welcoming? What are 1 to 2 tangible daily practices that we can use to promote cultures of positivity in our schools? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Morgane Michael. Morgane is a teacher, coach, speaker, and host of the Kindsight 101 podcast. She is also an author of 2 books, From Burnt Out to Fired Up, and A Blueprint for Belonging, Building a Positive School Culture from the Ground Up. You can connect with Morgane on LinkedIn, on X at Morgane Michael, on Instagram at Small Act Big Impact, on TikTok at Morgane.Michael, on YouTube at Small Act Big Impact, and at her website, MorganeMichael.com. Morgane, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you, my friend, ready to light it up?
Oh my goodness, I am so excited to be here. I am really grateful for you, Tim, for having me on again. It's delightful.
It is so great, and it's been such an honor to connect with you and other BC educators here on the program. That wasn't really by intention, but here we are, so we can sort of commiserate about our beloved province here in British Columbia. And you're right, it's been a couple of years since we've had you on, and the program has changed a little bit in the time since. And of course, you've changed. You've added a book to your repertoire, so I'm looking forward to catching up with you and learning more from your work. Before we get into your work and mission, though, Morgane, let's dig into your story. Tell us about a low moment or an experience of adversity that you've faced somewhere in your teaching or education career. And of course, importantly, describe how you overcame it.
I love that. So I think, there's so many stories that come to mind, but I think specifically related to this concept of belonging. And largely the reason that I really dug into this book is because when I actually moved to Canada, because I'm an immigrant, I was born in France. My mom was Canadian, my dad was French, and I was born in France. And so as an immigrant to Canada, I experienced firsthand what it felt like not to belong. And so that experience really resonated with me. I remember walking into my kindergarten classroom because I walked in probably about 2 months after school had started, and I had just turned 5. And I literally had, and some of my friends kind of recount this to me just because they think it's cute, but I had a pink beret on my first day, and I spoke 0 English, like never learned how to speak English. And so there I was, 5 years old, trying to belong. And I moved to probably the most rural little island, Gabriola Island, right off of Nanaimo, which is, if anyone knows, just a maximum 5,000 people at the time, in the summertime when there were tourists. So it was very small, very tight knit, and quite a particular culture. And so I did not feel like I belonged, and it took me time to sort of get my grasp on things. And when I use that experience in the classroom, I think how important it is to be able to, whether a student speaks the language that you speak or not, whether they are able to tap into those around them who can maybe just even recognize a couple of words, the ability to make someone feel welcome through nonverbal cues, through, building in as an educator or as a leader, that feeling of belonging through, buddy systems and the way that you run your classroom in the morning, the way that a principal stands outside, and greets the students in the morning. All of these things signal to someone like me when I was 5 that they have the potential to belong and that they're important and that they're valued. And that can be nonverbal. It doesn't have to be that you all speak the same language, but there's so much that can be conveyed. And so I think I'm very grateful to some of the notable teachers, the principals, the people who worked very, very hard. I'm thinking about my ELL teacher, like they would have called it ESL back then, who would have spent time with me, who would have signaled to me that I was important, that I mattered, and continued to believe in me. And then I remember sort of around grade 2, after having learned English, I started to reject my French language. So I refused to speak French any longer because to me, it represented a feeling of otherness. And so full circle though, when I graduated as a teacher, it became very apparent to me that there weren't a lot of jobs in the province, right? And so as I kind of worked into my career, I actually leaned very heavily on my French background and became a French immersion teacher and taught French immersion for 10 years and then ended up going to English. But I think about that the thing that I felt was sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a weakness, but in a way, it was something that set me apart and it felt like a negative thing, ended up being a tremendous strength to me. And so being able to convey this to students when they feel like they're different, understanding that those strengths can actually be powerful later in life, and what feels like a weakness can actually be a strength. So that was a powerful moment for me.
Yeah, what a story. That is fascinating. And I'm so glad you shared it. I did not know that you came to this country not speaking a word of English. That is fascinating. And it adds so much resonance to your most recent work, Morgane. So that's where we want to head next. Your last appearance on the program, we talked about your book there on the left, From Burnt Out to Fired Up. Of course, that title, Morgane, just fits with everything I'm doing here so well. Our brands really aligned, and we had a good conversation about that. And then more recently, A Blueprint for Belonging, which I understand just came out. The subtitle is Building a Positive School Culture from the Ground Up. So excited about this work, and hearing that story, Morgane, once again, that just adds so much value to the message that you bring and the work that you've completed. So tell us about that book, and specifically how significant is a sense of belonging when it comes to the learning environment?
Yeah, and I really want to touch on this because I think that when we think about belonging, immediately our minds go to SEL, social
Mm.
emotional learning. And I think that recently there's been a bit of a kickback. So I just want to acknowledge and understand that SEL does not necessarily mean that it's sort of a free for all and that, we just kind of let kids do whatever they want. That's really not what I'm saying. And I think when we think about what belonging is, there's a significant piece that is about we can create a culture that students can feel creative, that they can feel like they can push themselves academically, that there's a certain level of comfort so that when they are able to reach for a certain level of excellence, that if they fail or they feel like they fall in that effort, that we are able as a community, as educators, as the principal, as the leader, as fellow colleagues and students to lift those students up as they are working through the difficult cycle of learning. And what sometimes, when I think about that, the significance of belonging is there's so much research around, academics really do, kids do better in academics when they feel like they belong. Their mental health is better. So then they're able to take better risks, and stronger risks. Increase motivation. And so when students feel like they don't belong, there's sort of an isolation that happens. And essentially, they want to tap out, right? And so when we want them to be engaged and motivated in their life, in extracurriculars, in sports, in the actual academics that they're involved in, we want to be building up that belonging because that is what the outcome is, high attendance. It reduces bullying because students who feel like they belong don't feel like they need to exclude others in order to raise their own high value or their own sort of status, right? That essentially is usually what bullying is in one way or another. So if they feel like they belong, it's kind of a moot point. They don't need to do that as a mechanism to build that hot wire belonging for themselves. And then essentially resilience as well. So if a student or an educator for that matter feels like they belong, they're more likely to be able to bounce forward after adversity, which is a really important thing. And that's kind of what we want for all of our students. That's what we want for ourselves. But we also want that for our educators. This has been a tough couple of years. And so we want to also build that as leaders within our school building so that educators feel that. Because if I can just add this point, it's not just for students. And my book, I really, really wanted it to be not only for educators building belonging in schools, but there's a whole toolbox section in every single chapter, just specifically for leaders around how do I build school morale to reflect this feeling of belonging? Because if we don't do it from the top, then it's not going to resonate in our classrooms. And so we get a higher, job satisfaction with teachers when they're feeling valued and they feel like they belong. There's more collaboration and cohesion, which we know is good for students and for learning. And then there's just an overall feeling of positivity. And when you walk into a building, you can tell if it feels good to be there or if it feels burdensome. And so there's so many benefits and many, research tangible reasons for building belonging.
That was one of the questions, Morgane, that I wanted to put to you sort of as a follow-up is, do all of these principles apply to our staff members, to our colleagues as well? And I sort of didn't want to put you on the spot, but I'm so glad that you spoke to that, because it's not just the students, it's also the teachers and the educators, the paraprofessionals in the building. So we know that belonging matters for everyone, and you covered that so well. Let's start with the daily practices, Morgane, that build those cultures of positivity. What can we do on the daily that really build that positive momentum?
Okay, I love this. So, very simply, if you're a leader, greet your students, be visible, greet your teachers, try and remember. If you need a spreadsheet to remember things, to remember teachers and what's going on in their life, do that. The little things are really important. And the callbacks on, oh, you went away to the lake on the weekend. How did that go? Things like this just signal to your staff that you care. And that's all that matters. I think obviously management and competence matter too, but in terms of that connection building and belonging, just remember a few little details about everyone, and that'll keep you golden. When it comes to the classroom, I talk a lot about morning meetings, and I talk about how we can really build belonging through the structure of morning meetings. And so we can have a lot of different practices that help students to feel like they belong, like they have a safe place to share. There are many, many different structures to do this. It's not rocket science or new, but I offer many different strategies that you can explore related to feelings and belonging and all of these things. And so one of the strategies that I like to do is, and I teach kindergarten, but I think that there's an element of this that is powerful, is I like to teach belonging cues. And so how I do that, and it's a little different than the active listening poster that we all go through at the beginning of the year. And it really, what it comes down to is, in order to feel like we value each other as individuals, we need to signal to them physically through a series of different things, such as appropriate, and we want to be mindful of neurodivergence, right? Appropriate eye contact. How do our nonverbal cues, so our physical body, can actually communicate to our friends whether or not we're interested? And so teaching them these things explicitly, like, what does nodding signal to your friend when you're doing an AB partner conversation? Actually teaching them explicitly. You can make your friend feel welcome and belong if you're kind of nodding your head, looking at them every so often, and maybe putting in those little verbal signals that you're agreeing with them. Just that alone can create a sense of rapport. These are things that should be taught explicitly, but isn't always. And so these are like little things that we can do day to day. Even we do emotional charades. So in my class, we'll talk about looking at people's faces as a cue to figuring out how they're feeling, which is that makes sense, but doing it regularly enough that you can name feelings, you can identify feelings just non-verbally, and then you can do something about it. Like, what could I ask myself about the behavior that I'm kind of conveying that may or may not affect the people around me? Like, these are life skills that kids need to learn in order to relate to each other. And many adults don't know how to do this, right? So if we can teach students in the micro moments and kind of build on it throughout the year, it has a tremendous impact on how they feel with each other. And therefore, when they are explicitly maybe angry at each other, they can identify that, they can work through the feelings. There's so much benefit to this as well. So those are some of the things. Can I talk about one more little thing too?
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that this can be whether it's in your classroom or whether you are a leader onboarding new teachers. So whether it's a new student that you're onboarding in your classroom, or you're sort of welcoming a new educational assistant paraprofessional on staff or a new teacher, there are ways that we can go out of our way to make those students or those individuals feel welcome. So some of the ways that I highlight in the book is even having a little task force on your staff or in your student body who create a little video that kind of introduces your school. It can be very sweet and easy, but just sort of say, like, these are our values, this is what we're about, here are the bathrooms, here's the things, if you need the art room, here it is. Like, just kind of like a little info video that suddenly you get a very clear visual on what the school's about. And quite often in these busy times, we forget to do these very basic things, like take a tour of the school or to introduce people to some of the notable individuals that can help us solve our problems, right? And so being able to do something like that that's automated, that you could send ahead of time, is really, really helpful. A welcome letter, a little small gift like a cup or a pen that says welcome. I think these little tiny things can signal like, welcome, you belong to us. In this place, this is what we do. And there's something really calming and welcoming about that. And same thing goes for students. Set them up with a buddy. Make sure that you're communicating clearly with their parents ahead of time, and that you even give them an opportunity to do a walkthrough early. All these things make a world of difference, and it's like a front end load to sort of start everything off smoothly.
You gave me so many ideas. My head is exploding there,
Yeah.
Morgane, but you covered so much good ground and so many great suggestions. Thank you so much.
You.
I was thinking about I feel like my school is trying to move into the conversation about executive functioning and helping students explicitly gain those self-management skills. And you really spoke to what sounds to me, I'm probably out of my academic lane, and you are the one with the research, but it's like emotional functions. How do we relate to others in a very physical, practical way to show them that they are appreciated, that we're listening, and so on? And then your idea, of course, about the YouTube or the video orientation and welcome to the building has me thinking as well. That's something that I could put together. Why haven't I done that? So thank you so much. That would be a lot of fun. Even just introducing students to people like the principal, some of the custodians, or the people at the front desk, right, who they will see on those days when they are late, helping them meet those people virtually before they actually do in real life has got to be helpful.
And I think if we let the students lead it, back to that student-centered thing, there's so much power in that. Like, much of the curriculum, especially in the early years, is like, who are the important people in our communities? So have them identify it, have them go and do the interviews. Like, it could just be so sweet. And then you help with the editing and all of that. But I think having them kind of guide it is powerful. It takes time, but then they're part of it too. And they go, oh, I did that, and again, back to that whole ownership. You create this sense of like the school culture when we do it all together, right?
So I got over anxious a question back, Morgane, and sort of jumped the gun on this one, but I'm thinking as you are, and I know many of us are, about the first day of school and some of those first impressions, especially for new people that are visiting our communities. So when you think about physical spaces, entrance area of the school, the hallways, the common areas, how can we make them shout welcome? How can we make people feel included in those physical places?
I love this question. And before I dive in, I just want to tell a very, very brief story. So there was a principal, I start with the story and I'll just make it super quick. There was a principal who had to merge 3 Title I schools. So Title I schools are intense, kind of, we call them, just high support kind of schools. And it was a very violent kind of community. And so she was really, really nervous about this. And one of the things that she did to transform, because she completely transformed the overall school culture, climate, everything as she merged these schools together. And everyone was telling her, like, don't gather these students together. It's going to be a nightmare. Best of luck with that. They couldn't hire anybody, so she had to do it. Like, it was just a nightmare. So then she gathers these students the very first day, and it's pure chaos. And this one student stands up and is like, this isn't a school. You call this a school, and just totally calls her out. And she said she knew at that point she had a lot of work to do. So she started thinking about, like, how do I convey that this is a school? This is a place where you come to learn and you take pride in all of these things. And so she said she was a fanatic about bulletin boards. She would get on those announcements every single morning, and she would say to everybody, what would she say? She would say, I need you to know that I love you. Even if you haven't heard it today, I care about you. You matter. Like, she would sign off and literally tell these kids that they mattered and that she loved them. But the physical space was very, very important. So she said that there was this, in New York back in the 80s, there were like big riots and some union strikes. And there's a point to this. And the garbage people went on strike. And so there was garbage in the streets everywhere. And the city decided, because there had been some other experiment with this, and there was graffiti everywhere, and it was just kind of descending into absolute pandemonium. And the city, New York City, decided to clean up the garbage, like just get it done, spray over all the graffiti, like clean it up. And there's been sort of a notable researched effect that when we take care and pride in our spaces as cities, as schools, whatever it is, and we don't allow kind of the graffiti and the garbage and all of that to kind of spiral and snowball and to sort of like when you look around, it's like, oh my gosh, there's chipped paint and there's this, that it signals to the people in the building, in the space, in the cities, that this is a place to take pride in and that we are proud to be here and that it's part of our identity and it fits with that and our worthiness, all of this. There's this like psychological piece to it. And so when you ask me about like what are the physical elements that create a sense of belonging, it's really, really, really important. So on those bulletin boards, encourage your staff, or if you're a teacher, encourage your children, your students to create positive, bright artwork that's, up on the boards and you're changing it as much as it feels comfortable for you. And that if you have slogans that they're positive, like when I walk into my classroom, I teach kindergarten, I've mentioned, but I have several posters up at the top that have encouraging messages on them that are calm, but it's about worthiness. It's about you matter. And everywhere they look, there's sort of this reminder that they're important and that they're valued. I think using those announcements in the morning to signal that to your students, using assemblies as an opportunity to brand your school, as funny as that sounds, but I mean, these are organizations, and much of what the world does on a corporate level to brand a sense of identity with its stakeholders, customers, all of these things, we can apply those same concepts to our schools. And that feeling of cohesion, like talk to someone who's a Lululemon fanatic and they're going to be like, it's about the culture, like it's about what it represents. So you want your students to feel, and maybe Lululemon's a bad example, but you want your students, maybe Mountain Equipment Co-op, right?
Sure.
But you want your students, you want your teachers to feel heavily invested in the building. And part of that comes down to also those physical elements, student seating, that you have designed the classroom in such a way that student work is being demonstrated or on the walls, and that they've chosen kind of how they want things to be. So I think there's so many things we can do, but those are a few of the elements.
What great ideas. And some of my takeaways are maintain the building. So you
Yep.
talked about I think it's called the broken window effect.
That's what it
right?
is. Yeah,
like
yeah,
when we start to let little things go in the physical environment,
Yes.
there is an emotional signal.
Yes.
And so maintaining, and that's up to building leaders and sort of negotiating that with your custodial staff, but making sure the entrance and those common areas look really sharp or as sharp as possible, keeping the bulletin boards fresh with bright student work and those explicit messages. I was thinking more again, I was actually thinking yesterday, our schools could benefit from, now, none of us have the funds to make this happen, but couldn't you really have like a full-time bulletin board person in your building? I was thinking,
Yes.
wouldn't that be amazing? Who's just, because part of the deal is like taking down a bulletin board display and putting up a fresh one actually takes time.
It does.
And energy, and not every teacher can pull that off regularly. So that's just a dream. But
Well, and I have to,
yeah.
and I have to put
Yeah.
in like the vulnerable caveat that like I'm not
Yeah.
perfect. So I definitely have this one year. I think it was 2 years ago. There was a lot going on, and I had my skating bulletin board. Like they had made these little like self portraits of themselves with skates on, and it was still up, and it was probably like April. And for the record, in BC, there's no snow in April. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're not perfect over here, but we can talk about ideals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about. Thank you for joining us, Teachers on Fire. If you're getting value from this conversation, give that video a like wherever you are tuning in. Morgane, in the book, your most recent book, A Blueprint for Belonging, you write about the BUILD acronym: boundaries, understanding, integrity, listening, and dependability. Such great words. I was curious about boundaries, if you don't mind speaking to that one. When we think about boundaries, we don't always put that together with a sense of belonging. So how can boundaries contribute to belonging?
And I'm so grateful that you asked this, because I think, I sort of alluded to this earlier when I talked about the SEL kickback thing that's going on. I think I put boundaries in First and foremost, because in order to run an effective school, classroom, whatever, you have to signal a few things. So in order to build trust, which I think is essentially what boundaries creates and good leadership is it creates a sense of trust, is we need to have a certain level of competence, and we need to have a certain level of like benevolence. We need to, kids, staff, whatever, need to know that you've got their best interest in mind. But also you need to be able to follow through and have integrity on what it is that you say and mean. And so boundaries is a way to signal this, to say, here are the expectations. These are really clear. There's no gray area about this. And this is something that most educators and most leadership will explore, but it's sort of a reminder that in order to build trust and belonging, you must have clear boundaries around appropriate conduct, appropriate ways of interacting with one another. Like there has to be a bottom line. And I think sometimes that line gets blurred these days. And I think that there needs to be that sense of safety, right, for staff and for students, that they know that like within these bounds, we can sort of be free to express and whatever. But if your behavior is impeding on someone else's safety or well-being, that's a no-go. And I think being able to be very clear about that, it's kind of like, and I might just get some kickback about this, but I think there's sort of the gentle parenting effect. My kids are 8 and 10, and there are times when it's an absolute sorry, no, this isn't happening for you, And I think drawing the line in the sand, remembering that we're the adults, we get to make the decisions, and some decisions are not kid decisions, and being able to stand in that integrity and say, I'm the adult and I'm going to say this is not right, or this isn't going to happen right now, and I'm going to make this decision for you. Because as much as we want things to be student-led, it's very, very important that we also signal that we are safety makers, and we do that through boundaries. And so that is something that I feel very strongly about, so that when students are in your space, or educators, they can look to you and go, I feel safe. And that is going to create a sense of belonging as well. Does that make sense?
Oh, so
I might get
clearly.
kicked back on that one, but yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. And by the way, I've heard a lot of through lines. I've never heard safety makers. And I really like that one. No, the comparison with parenting means so much. And my boys are getting a little bit older now, but it's the parent that doesn't care, that lets things slide and sort of allows too much independence.
Yes.
It's the parent who's invested and who cares and who lets that child know that they do belong. They have a place in the family that actually draws those lines. And so that makes a ton of sense. Thank you so much for that comparison. Adrian on LinkedIn says, this is a great conversation. Build trust is essential for having a safe and empowering classroom. Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Adrian, for joining us this morning. Morgane, I'm conscious that you teach here in BC on the West Coast, but you also speak and present across North America in different schools and districts. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective. We're now 4 years removed from the dreaded pandemic and everything that entailed. But where do you see the profession today? What's your sense of teacher morale right now?
Honestly, I've been traveling, like you said, all over North America. I've spoken to lots of educators, whether they're high school teachers, university, or elementary, primary, or preschool teachers, all over the US especially. And it's a very common theme right now. I think people are tired. You talked about COVID being in the rearview mirror. I often talk about the road as well. And I say it's kind of like a merge lane. We're still in the merge lane, and we are, we're sort of, I think COVID gave us a chance to sort of take stock, to pause, to get off the hamster wheel, which in large part was really great. The problem is I think we've lost a sense of purpose a little bit. And I think when my first book was about burnout, and a lot of that comes down to like, how can we reignite? And like you said, brands are very aligned. How can we reignite a certain level of passion, whether it's related to education or not, that can trickle back into the classroom? Because as soon as we're feeling super passionate, we put our hand up and we go, yes, I want to be a participant in this school. I want to contribute. I want to do these things. I think a lot of people have been sitting on their hands, and because they're overwhelmed, or they feel like life's really busy, or honestly, I think a lot of mental health things have come up, where people are absolutely exhausted and are having a very, very hard time digging out. And so teacher morale, I think, is at an all-time low. And I always say to people, it obviously we want, we got to acknowledge, like, if this is feeling like this is something that's ongoing and you can't let go of, like, you need to go and talk to a medical professional about it. But if this is something that feels like a seasonal thing, or like you get back to school and you're like, oh, and there's that slumpy feeling, you have to really take some accountability and look at it and go, okay, I can't live life on autopilot like this and just kind of wish the years away. At some point, I need to say, what's important to me? What brings me joy? What gives me a sense of purpose? And you can do that through introspective work. And a lot of that is about, like, what are the things that lit you up when you were 5 years old or 10 years old? And how can I pull some of that into my daily practice? Can I pick up my art easel and just like make a piece of art just because I can and feel like it? Not for any outcome, but like, can I invite a sense of novelty into my life? That is what gives you that sense of purpose. And it will, promise you, it will trickle back into your practice. But I think if we don't sort of take a certain level of accountability and say to ourselves, like, this is the time, this is the first day of the rest of my life, and I owe it to myself to find a certain level of passion or joy. And I think that will affect that sense of personal morale, whether it's related to education or not.
That's such an empowering message. Thank you for that. When I think about my own context, I have the privilege of teaching technology tools, creative tools with elementary students. And that's one part of the job, one of a few parts, frankly, that gives me so much authentic joy. And I think to any, and by the way, on the same note, I've tried other things in the school environment. One example that comes to mind is I tried a serious coaching commitment a few years ago. I found that just dragged me down emotionally, right, in my own case.
Yeah.
And so for other teachers, you could flip those two examples, right? And maybe coaching is the thing. The key and the takeaway is that we have to find those areas of joy. And if really there is nothing, then that's another conversation to have with yourself, or as you said, with a professional. Speaking of professionals that can offer us coaching and consulting, Morgane, you offer some great services at your website. And I wonder, when you think about the coaching, consulting services that you offer, by the way, this conversation is not sponsored, but in terms of those services, what are the areas, what are the activities that give you the most fulfillment when you think about working with teachers?
I think it's so funny because when I think of, someone said recently, like, you're an author, this is amazing. And I just feel so funny about that, because I don't know if I feel like an author. I think I feel like a teacher writing things down and sharing them. And so always it's about, like, I love connecting with people and I love teaching. So coaching to me is simply stepping into that teaching role one-on-one. It's having that side-by-side conversation with somebody, but it's adults. And so my favorite client to work with is that super driven, a high achiever who's having a hard time kind of like choosing or being consistent or any of these things. And, I've helped some people. I think you even maybe you even had somebody on your show, Tyler Comeau. So he came to me after a big speaking engagement. He said, hey, how do I do what you're doing? And so I just kind of walked him through and coached him and said, you don't need to ask for permission, just do it. And he was like, okay. And he started this podcast. He's on like podcast number like 25 or something. And it's been no time at all. So it's been really rewarding. Someone else came to me who's unrelated to education. So I think coaching, I really love. And high up in leadership. And he's like, I just want to get to, a new job, a new role. And I said, okay. And so we worked together for 3 months and he got his dream job. And so I've been coaching him with the onboarding process and how to build, his team and all of this. And it's just been so much fun. So I think I get a lot out of that because it feels like teaching. I think if you're a high achiever, you're motivated. You just need someone to help you kind of execute a plan and create a plan, but you have a vision. Like, you want to write a book, you want to start a podcast, you want to start speaking, you want a side business. I'm happy to help you create a plan, execute that, check in with you, be an accountability partner, push you a little bit. And it's the people who I think need that accountability partner who can do incredible things. Like, really, the sky's the limit. So yeah, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And Tyler Comeau, you mentioned Tyler Comeau from the Elemental Educator. He's just publishing a conversation featuring me, which is really fun. And he is I think the youngest principal I've ever had on the program. So if you
are like 31 or something crazy, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Incredible. Incredible. So if you are tuning in to Teachers on Fire on the audio only version, check out the Elemental Educator. I know you'll be encouraged by what you hear over there.
Yeah, he's great.
If you are enjoying this conversation, consider adding the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel to your morning commute. Start your day on fire, and I would sure appreciate your subscription over there on YouTube. Well, as we start to transition, Morgane, I love to end with these biographical questions. Let's start with this one. Outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions away from professional learning and brings you alive as a human being?
Oh, okay. Well, I'd say right off the bat, well, my kids. Okay, I'm going to say my kids. I love spending time with them. I've been learning chess. My son's 8 years old, and he is like a chess master. And I just beat him for the first time last week. It was remarkable. But no, it's been really fun just spending lots of quality time with them this summer. I'd say the gym. Like I love working out. I love going for a run, walks, being physical, getting into my body, my favorite, and then travel. I've been doing a lot more travel. So just did a big trip to Disney with the kids and looking at doing some travel this year as well in those awkward school times that we have to kind of abide by. But that's been a big part for me too. So yeah, that's where I get a lot of my passion from.
Awesome. That's a great combo. Share about a personal habit or a productivity hack that contributes to your success, keeps your fire burning, allows you to teach and mom and do all of these other things in addition to researching and writing books.
Okay, Pomodoro Technique. 20 minutes. Set your timer. Do as much as you can do in 20 minutes and then leave it. And generally you probably won't leave it. But I think when we have this, like, I got to get my butt in the seat to start writing this novel or whatever it is that you want to do, it just seems so big. So make it small, chunk it up as you would for students.
Point us to an edtech tool or app that you currently love using somewhere in your professional practice or in your content creation work.
You know, I'm going to be kind of boring and I'm going to go Canva because, it's like my favorite thing and I probably use it every single day. So I have to nod to Canva and it's very user friendly and everybody knows about it. I'm not sure it's new, but it's my favorite thing. So, yeah.
Well, since you brought it up, I find there are still educators out there that are not aware that you do have free access to a premium account. So make sure you are locked into that and connect with your school or district IT administrator if you can't figure that out. Recommend a book, Morgane, one that you've been reading lately, or perhaps one of your all-time faves that you found deeply influential.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, I have like so many. I think Atomic Habits continues to be one of my favorites. Also, there's Michael Stanier's book, The Coaching Habit, I think it's called. He's got some wonderful questions in there. Just if you ever want to sit down and have a somewhat productive, but not pushy, but encouraging conversation with somebody who's driven, there's some wonderful questions in there that kind of encourage people to dig a little deeper, especially if you're coaching educators. It's a good one.
Tell us about someone that we need to follow somewhere on Education X, Instagram, LinkedIn, maybe TikTok, although I know you're not spending a ton of time there. Someone that's been inspiring you lately.
Well, I have a few. So I wanted to give a nod to Tyler Comeau because he's been working so hard and I really think he's an up-and-comer. He's got a book that he's working on. I don't know if he's really shared that with people, but he's working on something pretty powerful there. So I'd like to nod to him. I think he's doing great stuff. Also, my friend Lisa Baylis, she does a lot of work on mindfulness and she's got her own business and she's written a book and she's wonderful. And I think when we, in this hurry up and do more, be more, all the things world, she reminds us to slow down and take it easy and to remember what's important to you. And so I am very grateful for that message because I tend to be a hurry up and do more kind of person. And she reminds me to slow down.
Well, and speaking of slowing down, when you are out of brain space, Morgane, is there anything that you are streaming on the video front, whether it be Netflix, Crave, Prime, or anything else?
You know what? I'm like, not shockingly, not a huge TV person.
Sure.
It's completely inappropriate. Like, never watch this with your children. And I don't even know, but The Boys, I was rewatching that, and it's pretty captivating, but really violent. Like, it's up there with like Game of Thrones, weird and violent, and I don't know. Anyway, yes. So that's what I've been watching lately.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. The Boys.
Very off-brand. Off-brand. Yeah.
Off-brand. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. We won't hold it against you. Morgane, as we say goodbye today, what are the best ways for the Teachers on Fire listening to follow you and connect with your work?
Yeah, so I'm really active on Instagram. So if you just look up my name, Morgane Michael, or you look up Small Act Big Impact, you should be able to find, there it is. You can always reach out to me via email through my website, morganemichael.com. If you want me to work with you, I'd be delighted. We can just have a, exploratory call. Just email me or reach out on Instagram or Twitter or X. And I'm so happy to have the conversation with you.
All right. And we've got David Anderson joining us on LinkedIn. Good to see you, sir. He says, it's been a while since I've seen this brilliant show. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And he says, this is leadership. And I would agree. Thank you so much, Morgane, for everything you brought this morning. I really appreciate your expertise and insights. Thank you for joining this broadcast, Teachers on Fire. I appreciate you, and I'm grateful that you've spent some of your day tuning into this podcast episode. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Morgane Michael sparked your thinking and ignited your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
You can still go, even when you feel slow, you can still go, even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.